All right, you guys, welcome back into the classroom. I hope that you did indeed give yourself about 20 minutes or so to reflect on, absorb, and try to apply our lesson about focused, coherent, well-developed paragraph arrangement and flow before jumping into learning about sentence level structures. I know that for some students, especially students who've been through the 90s and the 100s here at DVC, a lot of the topics that we've been going over so far have been repetitive or review, but this is very crucial for a first year English class where everybody in the class is coming from a different English experience, a different start point, and it's really crucial that we all come up to the same fundamental foundations. So this week and next week, we're going to kind of put the capstone on our fundamentals before we build onto more advanced reading harder texts and writing on a more regular basis. So thank you guys all for, the great work that you've been doing, the great work that you've been doing to help each other as your groups develop. And with that being said, without any further ado, let's jump into college level sentence structures. Remember to follow along, asking questions in the discussion space, coming into office hours, taking notes where you're trying to capture kind of like the main idea from most of the slides. A lot of new vocabulary is coming our way. And then before we jump in, just another little reminder, don't feel like you need to master all of these things today. This is the starting point for us to begin composing these complex, mechanically accurate sentences throughout the rest of the term. So let's jump in to start talking about some new keywords and new vocabulary that will help us in this lesson. So to begin with, we're talking about complex sentences, and what that really refers to is just sentences that contain more than one idea. This builds upon the topic that we're building off of from chapter 8 in They Say, I Say, which is about connecting simple thoughts into longer, more complex, more interesting ones. Our skills for building complex sentences will help us avoid creating run-on sentences. A run-on sentence is a sentence that contains a disconnected set of ideas. Ideas are disconnected if they do not have those transition words, if they do not have those conjunctions that are holding one idea close by the hand, holding it toward the other idea. In order to prevent this, we can use coordinating conjunctions, which are transition words for linking two ideas of equal importance. This is very basic. Most of us know instinctively and intuitively, we know our coordinators, but just for the sake of clarity and sophistication, we will refresh those today. And then from some, subordinating conjunctions might be a little bit deeper. These are transitions for linking together a main idea and a follow-up idea. And we'll dig into those today so that you'll have a toolbox of transition words and transition strategies that you can bring with you to your rough draft, to where you can start drafting out complex sentences. Next, a little bit different is the idea of a mechanical or mechanically accurate sentence. And pretty much what that just means is that the mechanics of a sentence is how it is assembled, how it is put together. And our real goal is clarity. We want to clearly express our writing, so we want to assemble our sentences clearly. One main way to do this is by using active verbs. The active voice helps you describe, present, and discuss your writing assertively rather than passively. So we will look at some examples for how to do that. Next, we have pronouns. We really want to avoid overusing pronouns like it, this, or that. We saw this a little bit in our chapter 8 reading, trying to ask us, yes, use pronouns when it's necessary, but you don't want them to be dangling or detached. So we'll have a little bit of examples how to and how not to. And then parallel sentence structuring. This kind of refers to like verb structures, but the idea behind this is to keep your sentences structured in a consistent, unified, and coherent way. And this one is maybe a little bit more advanced. For some people, this is super intuitive, but for others, it will take a lot of practice. So here are all of like the word bank of all of the words that we're going to get into today to help us learn how to build those sophisticated college level sentences. So before we ask questions about these words, let's go through the lesson, and then we'll see if you have questions at the end. Getting started, we will look at combining two or more thoughts in order to express several connected ideas and avoid those rough, choppy sentences where you have like two short sentence after short sentence after short sentence. So as a further caution, this is how we will avoid run-on sentences. So sentences are those, the opposite of those short, choppy sentences where you have like a long rambling sentence where one idea is not connected to the next, is not connected to the next. So the conjunctions that we will learn today help you show how your ideas are connected, showing your work for the thought process that brings you from idea to idea to idea. As the textbook reminds us, we want, as writers, we want to connect those ideas for our readers. We don't want to leave our readers wondering why we said this and wondering now why we're saying the next thing. So let's learn some basic tools to accomplish those tasks, starting with coordinating conjunctions. And these conjunctions will clarify the structural pattern, the pattern of development, the logical flow, and the relationship between your ideas. One of the most common coordinating relationships are comparative relationships and cause and effect relationships. So we might think that those statements might be self-explanatory to the readers, but just adding one word or one short phrase can make a huge difference when you're connecting your thoughts. And then we're going to learn the words now, but as a little reminder, you always want to use a comma when you connect with your words. So let's look at what we're talking about, the common coordinating conjunctions. Firstly, we have the term for. It shows an effect to a cause relationship. So like, this is what I was doing for, this was the effect that I wanted, something like that. And it's showing that you're adding something. These are really basic, the most basic coordinators that we can get. Nor is showing a negative relationship between things, like neither nor, neither this nor that, but is giving you opposite ideas. And I know a lot of us might be like, yes, we know, but there could be somebody out there who needs this refresher, so bear with us as we get through this slide and the next. We have or, which shows alternating ideas. You know, this is one way of looking at it, comma, or here's another way of looking at it. Yet shows a contradiction. You know, like I really wanted this, yet I didn't have the time to get it. And so shows a cause and then effect. So like the order is kind of important. Like I wanted this to happen, so I took these actions. Let's run over to the next slide and look at some examples. You won't need to write these examples down in your notes. It's just a little bit to illustrate what we're talking about and like refresh and recall some of those maybe older lessons that we've learned. So if we think about for, she flies as much as she can, for she loves to travel. And you can replace each of these clauses with anything of your own to really get the gist of this. And what the purpose is just you're showing a cause, a reason. So she flies as much as she can, could be its own sentence. She loves to travel, could be its own sentence. But you're joining these together with a linking word that shows the reason why she flies as much as she can. Next, we have and you're adding similar ideas to one another, and you can fill in the clauses with anything you like, but I'll just quickly suggest she arrives quickly and she earns reward miles. Two simple sentences joined together into a longer sentence. Nor are two negatives, so both of these are negative ideas. She doesn't like driving, nor does she like the train. Talking about two things you don't like, two things you don't have, two things you don't know. And once again, you don't need to write down these examples. This is just kind of illustrating the coordinators. It'll be more helpful for you if you write down something from your own ideas. Moving on, we have but. So this shows opposite ideas. She wants a direct flight, but she must book a layover. So they're opposites of one another, what you want versus what you can have. Or is alternating ideas. So these are two equally open possibilities, two equally open options. She can choose a layover in Shanghai, or 1 in Beijing. And now you're seeing, so to save space, we're getting a little more into the complexity of it. Like we could write, she can choose a layover in Shanghai. She can choose a layover in Beijing. But instead we're saying she can choose a layover in Shanghai, comma, or 1 in Beijing. So adding a little bit of difference into your sentence structure. Yet, this is contradicting ideas. Maybe you're being pulled or torn in 2 directions. She loves Shanghai, comma, yet she wants to explore the capital, being Beijing. So kind of a conflict, a contradiction. And then finally, so. Unlike for, this is showing what the reason is first, and then the action that is taken. So she has never been to Beijing, so she chooses the flight that stops there, where we have the reason and then the action, as opposed to for, which has the action and then the reason. So those are my examples. They're kind of basic, but I'm going to ask you guys to maybe pause the video and try it on your own. Maybe draft a few examples by composing a couple of complex, coordinated thoughts that help you share some ideas from your college success research topic. Maybe try to write 2 or 3 complex sentences that clearly and effectively show the relationship between your ideas. As a shortcut, so you don't have to go back to that slide, but hopefully you wrote down some of those words. You can remember this acronym FANBOYS that kind of captures all 7 coordinating conjunctions: for and nor, but, or, yet, so. So pause, give yourself maybe literally like 3 minutes max to write out 2 or 3 sentences about your topic, your college success research topic. Okay, resume the video when you're ready to move on. And then we're going to look at subordinating conjunctions. These are more complex. These are more interesting. These are more sophisticated. These are at a higher level, but the function is still the same: to express the structural relationship between your ideas, this time between a main idea and a follow-up idea. Follow-up ideas are kind of like, it could be qualifiers like except for, as long as, or it could be reasons, like the reasons that support your main idea. And there is a ton of them. You may not need to write them all down. This might become like overwhelming. But let's look at some, and then you can write down ones that you like or your go-tos, and remembering that all the synonyms for these are also subordinators. So if you want to look at contrasting ideas, we have a lot of options: although, though, even though, instead, rather, whereas, whether, while, on the other hand. So all of these and any kind of synonym that you can think of are all contrast structures. So maybe in your notes, it's helpful to write out contrast as a structural relationship and maybe 1, maybe 2 of the actual conjunctions. Next, we'll look at effect, cause. This is the same for cause, effect, because, since, as, therefore, so, to, etc. All of the synonyms that go along with this. And we'll look at examples after. Conditional reasoning. This is something that maybe not everybody has heard of so far. Conditional reasoning is like, if this is the case, then that will be the result. Or if only this were to happen, then I would feel this way. Or this is the most important thing to remember, unless you have to do this or that. So conditional reasoning is maybe a little bit out of the box. And remember, you guys, just write down the structural relationship in a couple of the coordinate or subordinating conjunctions. You don't have to write down everything on the slide. Time and sequence. This is the chronological process, the chronological order, the flow, if you will. And we can use subordinating conjunctions: after, before, by the time, until, when, as soon as, while, since. Like a lot of options are available to talk about chronological order: first, next, lastly, things like that. Addition. So if you're adding, this is kind of a way to add a little bit of pizzazz to our lists, so that we're not always saying and, in addition, also, furthermore, besides, similarly, likewise. These are good ways to kind of spice up when you're adding more topics and more topics. more details and more details. Nextly, restating, and we learned from our chapter 8 reading how restatement is such a great signpost. It's such a good signal or pointing technique to keep your readers on track, restating yourself just like with a slight difference. In other words, to sum up, in short, things like that are great techniques for like keeping the relationship of your writing cohesive, keeping the flow, keeping the momentum of the flow. Exemplification. So we always want to use examples in our writing, and to introduce these, we have some very simple phrases. For example, for instance, to illustrate, and then synonyms that you can come up with through your own independent thinking. So again, reminding you guys, we want to write down the structural relationships, like the titles of each of these little cards, but we don't need to write down every example. That won't be an effective study tool necessarily. And then finally, place. So like location-based things like in front of, beside, next to, behind, here, there, where. Place markers might not really come up in too handy for our college success project, but if you're writing in other classes or for other purposes, you might take advantage of all of these subordinating conjunctions. Next, I'm going to share with you some of my examples, and then I'm going to ask you guys to pause the video and think of your own examples before you move on to really drafting your paragraphs. So before we look at the examples, I just want to call out our attention. Coordinating conjunctions for and, nor, but, or, yet, so, those ones, they have to come in between your thoughts. You have to have your first thought connector, second thought. Subordinating conjunctions are so much more flexible, more creative. It gives you as a writer so much more license to follow how you wish to express yourself. Usually there's a comma, not always, but let's look at some examples. So here are two examples that we can show contrasting ideas by using subordinating conjunctions. So first, she did not enjoy the stop in Beijing, comma, even though it was a lively city. And now here's another way where we can use a different subordinator and the comma to express the same idea differently. Although Beijing was a lively city, she did not enjoy the stop. So you can see, can you point out what's the main idea? What's the follow-up idea? Not enjoying Beijing and Beijing being a lively city are the two ideas that are expressed, but using subordinating conjunctions gives us more freedom and creativity to express those ideas. Remember, the conjunction can be a synonym. The comma placement is still important because it's linking together the separate ideas. Nextly, let's look at cause and effect, for example. She had a bad time because she did not research her trip in advance. So having a bad time and not pre-planning are the two ideas that we're linking. Another way to do this is to put the subordinator at the start. Since she did not research her trip in advance, comma, she had a bad time. So the comma is really making a visible indentation between one idea and another. Let's look at a different one, conditional reasoning. I want to share this one because it's new for some people. If you spend time planning a trip, comma, then you will be able to enjoy your destination more. Conditional reasoning is really similar to cause and effect. It's just a little bit different, like flavor, if you will. Nextly, unless you spend time planning your trip, comma, you will not be able to enjoy your destination. So again, we have two ideas, planning and enjoyment, and then they're separated by that comma, and then the conjunctions, depending on which ones you're using, could come at the beginning, at the middle, etc. And let's just take one last look at time and sequence. These ones are, super intuitive for most of us. While she was waiting for her flight to Tokyo, she researched top attractions, using that comma to separate the two ideas in the sentence, using the conjunction at the start. And then maybe after being disappointed by her trip in Beijing, she researched top attractions in Tokyo. So just multiple open different ways to do this. The key idea here though is like knowing what your two ideas are and making sure that there is a clear separation with a comma. After that, the conjunction, which one you choose and where you place it, is a little more flexible. So ask questions if you don't understand these. I'm going to give you guys a chance to try this on your own. And I do greatly encourage you to draft up some complex sentences with like interesting creative subordinating ideas, maybe 2 or 3 of them to talk about your college success research project. And I would really love if you are unsure or unconfident in any way, or if you want to take like a leadership role and like you are feeling confident and you just want to show an example of your own, please share that in the discussion space so that it's adding onto and building onto this lesson, so that we're like as a group we can come to an even more full understanding. So pause, give yourself a couple minutes, really just a couple, and bang out a couple of like complex sentences that connect with your topic. And now when it's time to move on, we're going to take a different look at mechanical accuracy. So moving away from the basics of joining sentences together, now getting into a little bit more complicated techniques for composing your sentences with correct word choice and word placement. Techniques for having smooth and coherent sentences, both from sentence to sentence and then inside each sentence. Mechanically accurate sentences also help you directly state your ideas without relying on filler words or fluff. So as we begin to take a look at these sections, remember effective note taking, you might want to write down the topic of the slide. You might want to write down the advice that we're presenting. It might not be helpful to write down the examples. That might become overboard in your notes, depending on your thinking style. So let's take a look firstly at using active verbs. Using an assertive and active voice is just easier to read. If we avoid using the past tense, it can be like clunky. So a past tense example would be like, it was revealed through research that Tokyo is a large metropolitan area. It's just kind of like takes up too much space. It's kind of clumsy to read it. Instead, we use an active voice, present tense verbs. Research reveals that Tokyo is a large metropolitan area. It's just more to the point, if you know what I mean. Next, we have this other habit called like nouning your verbs. So anytime you're like using like the and of a lot, like in a phrase, you might be like nouning your verb. So for an example of what not to do, here's one example. Parks have the appearance of beauty and comfort. It's a true statement. It's not a wrong statement, but it's an awkward sentence structure. Instead, you can be much more simple, much more direct. If you say parks appear beautiful and comfortable. So one kind of red flag is if you are always saying the blank of, something like that. If you have a lot of ofs in your work, you might be nouning your verbs. So try to be more direct. So for example, an example of good notes for this slide would be something like a title or like a heading that says active verbs, assertive voice. And then you might just simply write down avoid past tense. You might want to write down like an X for it was revealed and a check mark for reveals, if that's helpful to help you remember. The same thing for don't noun your verbs. And you might want to write down appearance of versus appears. Something like that might help you consolidate these ideas into just a few words that your eyes can easily review if you need to check back on your notes. Next, we can look at overusing pronouns. This can become really confusing. Here's an example. We have one for this and one for it. So an example of what not to do. So many foreign sights, smells, and sounds overwhelmed her senses. This caused confusion. It's just more direct to join those two sentences together. Like you have confusion as the like main idea for the second short sentence. Instead, pepper that into your whole sentence. She was confused and overwhelmed by many foreign sights, smells, and sounds. So like if you have two sentences like this, see if you can join them together into one complex idea so that you don't have to overuse pronouns. Next, we have it. You wouldn't want to do something like, it takes time to convert prices from yen into dollars. It's hard to recognize some of the food. This makes it hard to find dinner. Like we have 3 short, simple, choppy sentences strung together using it a lot. And this is even in there too. Like we have a lot of pronouns. Instead, we can be direct. We can be clear. We can say dinner can be a challenge since some foods are unrecognizable and price conversions take time to calculate. One theme that stands out in both of these examples is that we're switching around the order of our ideas. So in the wrong example, confusion is the second idea. But to make it more clear and more direct, we use confusion as the first idea in the more direct sentence. The same thing is true for the second example. Being hard to find dinner is the ultimate realization of these examples. It comes at the end in the clumsy sentence construction, but if we move that to the beginning, we can have a smoother and more direct sentence that we present to our readers. So this could be like kind of a red flag or a warning sign in your writing. When you revise your writing, you could say like, is my main point delayed? Did I say my main point second? Maybe I can make this more clear if I begin with my main point. Something like that. And that is A-okay. Remember that in the writing process, we write to discover what our main idea is. So in your sloppy draft, that is totally a fine technique for getting your ideas onto paper. But you're revising, and when you're editing, you want to ask yourself, did I overuse my pronouns? Did I delay my main idea? Can I be more clear if I say this first? So check your notes, check that you have something about overusing pronouns, maybe give yourself a little reminder that pronouns are this, it, that, etc. And then you might want to just end with that final advice, like check to see if your main point can be stated first, something like that, something to help you remember these ideas later. Next, we're going to look at using parallel verb forms. Parallel verb forms keep the momentum of your ideas flowing so that your audience can follow those complex ideas. We're going to look at lists and comparisons. So we have a confusing list that has different verb forms. She liked visiting the shrines, tasted new foods, and to take the train. These are separate ideas. The verb tenses are confusing and all over the place. Instead, use a parallel verb form across your entire writing. So whether that's the infinitive or the transitive, whatever stands out or whatever works for you, do try your best to make sure it is in the present tense. Remember that the present tense is more assertive and more active. Anyways, we would say like she likes visiting the shrines, tasting new foods, and taking the train, or she liked to visit the shrines, taste new foods, and take the train. It's much more direct if we use parallel structures. The same is true with listing or comparing. I'm sorry, the same is true for comparing. So she preferred to walk by the river rather than pushing her way through the markets. Like, it's a true statement, but it's a little bit clumsy. It's not as sophisticated. We might say instead, she preferred walking by the river rather than pushing her way through the markets. We could also say she preferred to walk by the river rather than to push her way through the markets. It's a small detail, but it makes a difference on how easily your reader can follow the flow of your ideas. So in your notes, maybe write down this key idea, use parallel verb forms, all ing, all present tense, all whatever it is. Whatever helps you remember. And you might want to also note down when you want to ask yourself. And a lot of times this is for making lists and for making comparisons. And at this time, it's also a good idea to go back through the rest of your notes, see if you have questions, comments, see if you would like to share some examples to illustrate ideas from this lesson, see if you would like to sample out things that you're trying for the first time and you want feedback on. And then other than that, that was our last topic. Well-constructed sentences are going to let you express your thoughts in a complex, sophisticated way, but also help you make sure that your reader can easily follow the flow of your ideas without getting confused or lost along the way. So with those techniques and strategies in mind, I am going to set you guys all off to drafting out your paragraph or your paragraphs for your College Success Collaborative speech. So remember, you guys all just need to write one paragraph to really, meet the requirements of this assignment. We are adding on a ton of detail and complexity. We're adding on quotes. We're adding on coherent structures of flow, patterns of development. We're adding on complex sentence structures. So what I want to do for this assignment is to focus on quality of writing rather than the quantity of writing. Let's see if we can get some really perfect paragraphs that we are super proud of and help us really put some of these new ideas into action. So run over to your Google Doc when you're ready to jump into your homework. Try to compose a paragraph, looking at your outline and building onto it. The topic sentence, try and get a complex, sophisticated, mechanically accurate topic sentence that like introduces your thought clearly and directly. Introduce some background about your topic. This could come from like why you're interested in this topic. This could come from like assumptions or ideas about the topic. And then move on to your evidence. So give a little bit of context. Embed that evidence into your own sentence. Give that direct quote with the citation tag. Paraphrase. Remember from chapter 3, there's some paraphrasing techniques. Interpret by calling attention to key ideas from the quote. Analyze the quote by connecting it to the real world context of college education. Maybe connecting it to yourself, making a self-to-text connection where you're saying how this might impact your actual experience. Respond to it, agree or disagree, things like that. So really build out a well-developed paragraph that uses complex sentences, that has a logical flow, and uses those transition and connecting words that we've been studying through our homework reading and from the lessons that we've had today.